the sky. You're not going to this side. Hi. Sweet. Check, check. All right. So, lessons learned from the food industry. My name is Wolf Goerlich. I am with CBI. I'm also involved with the BSides in Detroit, as well as Converge. And I head up a thing called CBI Academy, which is where we take young people right out of college, people maybe had a year or two and got stuck in a help desk, and we put them through a 2-year intensive where they work for me and they rotate throughout CBI and get a lot of experience through different practices. This is important because a lot of the work I'm talking about today, my third academy team helped me out on. So shout out to them. Long before that, long before the academy, long before CBI, long before BSides, I was a young man, very, very young, like 10 years old, and I had this guy. I loved this thing. The TI computer was my very first computer, and I loved it because I grew up on a farm. And when you're on a farm and you're a young guy, there's nothing to do. When you're on a farm and you're a young guy and you got a computer, you can pretend to your parents you're learning something valuable for a career, and they don't make you go on the farm, which is good because farming is no fun. So I bang on this every day, and fast forward many years, when I started thinking about the food industry, when I started thinking about doing this assessment, when I started figuring out what we could do to protect the food we eat, I kind of had an image in mind, right? That I was going to go sit down with these simple farmers, and we were going to plow the fields, and we were going to have a good time. Maybe something a little bit more complicated, but still I had this idea that, it was going to be like when I grew up, right? These small family farms. They're going to be like, tell me how you grow the cattle, and they would tell me, and I'd be like, that's fascinating. Do you have a TI-99? What? Let's just move on. But when I actually looked at it, I was amazed at the complexity of modern food industry. I was completely amazed. Modern food industry is an industrial complex, right? Modern food industry is all the same technology that we have throughout all of our industries combined and compressed into one environment. It's very automated, it's very rigorous, and it takes a lot of power, a lot of power. So if you guys have seen any of the ICS work in the industry, if you've seen any SCADA work, right, for energy, if you've seen any people talking about NERC-CIP, imagine all those same risks in the food industry, except for the food industry isn't regulated by NERC-CIP, except for pen testers aren't banging on the doors of the cow producer and saying, hey, can I pen test you? You got some real risk. Russia might be at you. No, they don't get any of that attention. And it's not like they don't use a lot of power. Fun fact, Utah, the entire state of Utah, as much power as it uses in a year, that's the same amount of power that the food industry is processing. So they consume that much power. And in many places, these food industries, these food manufacturing plants, have put in place reclamation generators, methane generators, all these sort of things to capture and conserve some energy. So all that same equipment, tenth of the power, all dumping into food industry. So if you think about things like we saw the Ukraine power plant, which I'm not going to try and pronounce, that type of attack where they shut down an entire power plant, all that same technology is in the food industry. All that same technology is present but not protected. Also tons and tons of water. Typical cow takes something like 10,000 gallons. Typical chicken takes like 10. If you think about some of these food plants, they're processing 1 million chickens in a week. Lots and lots and lots of water. So that water gets pumped out of the ground, but also water gets cleaned and reclaimed and all those sort of things. So again, all the same technology you think about in a water processing plant or in a water dam exists in the food plant. 10% of all fresh water gets consumed by these types of companies we're looking at. And so if you remember like NY Bozeman, where there's a denial of service attack that took off the dam and almost threatened to flood there. Or the Camari Water Company, which is not the real name, which is why it's in quotes. If you guys haven't seen that one, Google that, it's pretty cool. They're running a technology slightly older than a TI-99. It was an old AIX box from the 1980s that they don't know who it was, but these guys got into it, and they were able to change the pH of water and basically poison the water. And it was a manual control that saved the people downstream from getting poisoned water. So food is a modern marvel, but it's got all the same risks of every other operational technology plant we have. It's got all the same concerns of every other plant we have, and it's not thinking about these things because these people grew up out of farming. These people grew up out of, slaughtering the cows, the pigs, and the chickens. And then, of course, now they're inheriting all these same power that runs power plants and water and what have you. So before I go forward, any questions on the food industry itself? Cool. All right. So we went and looked at 15 separate food processing plants, 15 different locations. That's some of the information that I'm going to share with you today. Before I get to that, I just want to give you guys a trigger warning. If anyone's got a sense of stomach, take a moment. If anyone's concerned, put down a drink, hold your breath. Trigger warning. Because what I'm about to show you oftentimes rattles even the most sturdiest of security guys. I see it in like CSO magazine, right? And I see it in people like podcasting, and I see it in talks all the time. They're like, beware of this new scary thing because it could launch calculator. This is what they all show, right? There's this new O day, and we got XP because we got calculator. And we're going to get you by word macros because we got calculator. And there's even like the recent one that affected the CI. There's a CI talk here, by the way, continuous integration. I'm really excited about that. I'm going to go catch that later on this afternoon. But even with that, right, we're all moving everything to the cloud. We're all moving everything new. It's in Jenkins, and everything's great. And let me demonstrate how risky the cloud is by showing you that we breached it and can launch calculator. So I don't know about you guys, but I kind of got blasé about a lot of security concerns. I kind of got like, yeah, security's bad, and yeah, we can lose some data again. And Ian hit on it this morning, right? How oftentimes we're like, yeah, you really should fix that because, bro, someone could run calculator on your mainframe. We're like, oh, dude, I should fix that. But we haven't really thought about a lot of the impacts. So meanwhile, in real life, the impacts to food can be very bad, right? So if you think about these water boilers and the temperatures they're running at and the immense pressure. All that pressure is regulated by an ICS device. All that ICS device is maintained by some Windows XP computer somewhere. And if it goes off, if the pressure isn't maintained, if something isn't right, bad things happen. And spend some time, Google this, right? Food industry, the number of injuries, very, very high for manufacturing. And the number of injuries are usually tied to some piece of equipment going bad. And it is not unheard of for boilers to go boom. Also, of course, we're very concerned about health in our food supply by the unholy trilogy of E. coli, mad cow, and salmonella. I love these. Anyone have these? These ThinkGeek plushes? They're great for kids of all ages. Hey, Merry Christmas, I got you salmonella. This may be why my daughter doesn't like me. Earlier this month, we did a talk, and that same week when I did this talk last time, salmonella had outbroken, right? And it was all tied back to poultry and all tied back to how it was cooked and how it was maintained. If the temperature isn't right, if the treatment isn't right, if from cleaning to cooking to storage to transportation to cooling to our table, bad things can happen. So in real life, it's bad stuff. And it's not just calculator bad stuff. It's not just we found a technical vulnerability bad stuff. It's real world impacts. Questions on impacts, what we find, what could go wrong. You guys are really quiet. I'm going to start asking you guys questions. All right. So what does this look like? IT and operational technology looks something like this. So you've got your typical corporate network, everything we're familiar with, such as your LAN, right? Your ERP system, your ordering system, how we process credit cards, how we take orders in, how we communicate with partners, how we get the chickens to the plant, and how we let the downstream customer know that we're sending them stuff. All the traditional IT equipment. Can we all agree? We're amazing at securing traditional equipment, right? No vulnerabilities. We run the scan. There's nothing to find. Everyone says PCI is good. We're getting better. But then we go to the SCADA network. And what SCADA network is it's all the computer equipment that directly talks to the industrial systems. And this is usually where we find fantastic OSs like AIX from the 1980s, Windows XP everywhere. Service Pack 2, Ian was talking about. I'm like, that's amazing. They got to Service Pack 2. I want Service Pack 2. So this is where we've got that thin layer of really old equipment that's talking to all of the production network. And the production network's where you got your processing, your wireless controllers. Production network is where you got your solenoids and your motors, your servos, your cutters. Production network is where we're moving the cattle and moving the chicken throughout the factory to clean it and get it to the food trucks. And we've got basically no insight into this. As an industry, we've grew up, right, with the TI-99 and above. We grew up focusing in on the IT stuff. We grew up patching and vulning and scanning. And for just about ever in a day, we've ignored all the operational technology. And there's real interesting outcomes of that. It's a different culture. It's a different mindset. They talk differently. I usually bring up the example of wireless security. So we say like, hey, wireless security is important. And they're like, wireless security is important to us too. I'm like, you don't understand. There's vulnerabilities to wireless security. And they're like, no, I do understand. We take wireless security very seriously. You do? Absolutely. How? We lock up the wireless scanners every day, and it's padlocked, man. It's like a master lock, and we got 2 of them. I'm not sure. It's secure. Trust me. Can you pick that lock? Maybe I could get Iron Geek. Who? Look, it's secure. No, it's not secure. So we're not even speaking the same language. And it's 2 completely different worlds. In the corporate side, right, the corporate IT is generally like maybe $1,000 to $10,000. Oftentimes spun up in the cloud now, so it's an incremental cost. It's cheap. It's disposable. We run it for 2 to 3 years. And it's maintained by the IT team. And we can scan and patch the hell out of it. We oftentimes don't patch the hell out of it, but we can scan it because it was all designed to be scanned. Very few of these IT systems anymore are you going to knock off doing a scan. On the SCADA side, on the production side, it's a whole other world. These systems cost anywhere from $10,000 up into the millions. Oftentimes when we're talking to food producers, we're like, do you have a dev network? You're doing some really cool stuff with this PLC code. How do you dev? They're like, what do you mean dev? I mean, like, test. Well, we put it on there and it works or it doesn't. Well, I mean, do you like have a QA? What do you mean QA? It's high quality. We assure you that. Like, okay, good. But they can't even afford a dev network because it's like $64,000 for this one piece of equipment. They're not going to buy 2 or 3 to test on. And because it's so expensive, they run it for years and years, 20 to 30 years usually. So it runs and it runs and it runs, and all the old stuff that has to be maintained is still plugged into it. Fun fact, too, about the food processor, #1 purchaser of serial interface cards is the people who are delivering the meat to our tables. Because everything's still running over serial, and it's so hard to get them. They're still buying tons and tons of these things. And it's usually run by the operations team, again, completely different team, and you do not scan this stuff. You do not scan this stuff. It's not uncommon for me to go into those environments and be like, hey, I'm from IT security, I'm here to help you. They're like, you're not one of those guys, are you? Like, no, there's no way I'm one of those guys. What do you mean? The last guy who was from IT security, he came in and we were down for 2 weeks. Like, hell no, I'm not like one of those guys. What did he do? I don't know. He used some Nessus Nmap thing, and everything broke. Yeah, don't worry, we're not going to do that. But these things are not designed to be scanned at the application layer, right? They're not designed to run through normal scanning. So if you do a volume scan, oftentimes you can knock something off, the food line's down, and it's bad. We're talking millions of dollars of impact. And it's also completely different equipment, right? So a lot of times we're like, oh yeah, we work with Windows, we work with Linux. Does anyone in the room here work with Omron? No. HMS? I was excited that there's robots. We'll get back to robots in a minute. And then Allen Bradley, right? So it's a completely different realm of vendors. And a lot of these vendors, again, grew up on operational technology side. A lot of these vendors grew up servicing operations. A lot of these vendors have not thought through security. They don't have bug bounties. They don't have great reporting mechanisms. It just doesn't work that way. Fanuc robots, though, I thought that was cool. I'm like, we're going to look at robots. This is amazing. Like, I want like Terminator, like cleaning my chicken and giving me a sandwich. But of course, it doesn't look like that. It looks more like this. Fun fact, though, that gray robot, Q1 of this year, had a bug in it that was remotely exploitable that allowed you to overwrite parameters and take control of it. That's fun. So we got like $1 million robot moving tons of stuff back and forth, and I'm like right here, and here comes the robot, and I can make it do anything I want to, and it's got a saw blade on it. Huh. This is much better than running calculator. So this isn't your typical type of farm, and it's not your typical type of tech. It really is a different space, a different set of risks, different vendors, different scale. And questions on that before I go to assessment, what we looked at? I don't think they'll listen. Quiet in the bar con. Yeah, they don't listen. It was a good try, though. So, with respect to these environments, we went out, like I said, and looked at 15 of them. I'm going to walk you through our assessment methodology for looking at all 15, and then we're going to come back and show you the results we found. The assessment methodology follows 6 main points, and these 6 main points work for the food industry. It worked very well. By the time we were done, we were able to get in and out in days. But I would also argue they work pretty well for any other type of assessing of technology we have, right? We all have our own space of operational technology. We have our own space of technology we need to take care of. So, number one thing, and this is the thing that we always skip because no one likes to do it, myself included, is governance. It all starts with governance. I actually have a GRC team, which I'm excited about because that means I don't need to do governance. And it's much like typing on the TI-99, so I don't have to go to the farm. I just get on my computer. I'm like, I'm really busy looking at pen test results. Can you do the governance? Like, yeah, we love governance. Great. But there is governance standards to food production. It's 53B is what we always use for IT forever and a day, right? 82 is for industrial controls, as well as NIST is tying this all back to the cybersecurity framework now. So we're able to look at this side and go, okay, here's all the 52 risks, and here's all the 80, and do a aligned governance assessment so that we can present these results and we can say, hey, NIST says X, right? According to NIST, we should be doing Y, which is a much easier conversation to have with an operations person because they respect standards and technology. They really are getting pretty loud, aren't they? Shh. Thank you. All right. So we can do it aligned with governance, and we can present it with risk, and we can talk standards, which operation people are much more likely than technical people to appreciate standards, and NIST provides us all that. The other thing is we can start looking at all this technology and start mapping it out to business process. I'm about to show a slide, and the last time I showed a slide, a good friend of mine took a picture of me presenting and put it on Twitter, and then the following conversation is, it was the ugliest PowerPoint slide he had ever seen. So this is officially the ugliest PowerPoint slide anyone's ever put up, and I'm glad to share it with you today. Here it is. I don't think it's that bad. Is it that bad? Do I need to rework? Probably do. I probably do. All right. But here's the point. A, it is pretty ugly. And that's kind of the point because this top is like the world that everyone lives in operational technology. We look at that and we kind of go cross-eyed and like, what the hell are you showing me? But B is, the interesting thing here is up top is if the representation of a plant line. So it goes, we're evisceration, we're defeathering, we're boiling. This is chickens, of course. We're moving the chickens through, we're cutting them, processing, packaging, storing, freezing, shipping, right? And then the next layer is all the ICS equipment that supports that. The next layer is all the SCADA supports that. The important point is, when we talk about governance and we talk about assessments, we need to tie the technology back to the business. In the operational world, the way we do that is by saying, hey, this particular HMS piece of equipment is supporting your conveyors, and that's supporting moving the chicken throughout the entire plant. What is the impact of that going down for 2 days because you had a vulnerability? Which is, again, a great conversation to have as opposed to saying, yeah, there's this CVE, and the CVE is risk high ranked, and you get what I'm saying. The next is recognizing all this stuff, we need to plan very carefully. Because when we go in these environments, we don't want to just scan. We go in these environments, it's very easy to knock things over. We go in these environments, the technology is everywhere, and we got a very limited amount of time. And it's not just the traditional like PMI, right? Scope, resources, schedule. I mean, yes, that's important. We need to do project management planning, and we need to follow the PMI process. But it's not just that. It's weird things that you would not think of in a technology space. At least I didn't think of it. So, for example, the weirdest thing that I found of this entire process, and I was actually really excited. I started laughing, and they're like, what's so funny about that? I'm like, don't worry about it, but this just really amuses me. You're telling me that my project schedule is being driven by flocks of birds. Like, yeah, of course it is. Okay, let me just take a minute to appreciate that. What ends up happening, because of the avian flu, they actually have security maps that track bird flights. And you're not able to go to plant A to plant B if you get there before the birds, because you could potentially transfer the bird flu. It's okay if the avian birds transfer the bird flu, but no, we are not going to do it. So weird things, right, happen in the food industry, such as tracking birds and running our plan against birds. Next thing is being very, very realistic. So we're going to go in this plant, we're going to avoid the birds, we're going to try and map everything up. But there's a ton of equipment in these plants, right? And so it's constantly balancing the ability for us to dig deep into an environment and get visibility versus the ability to see everything we can see as quick as we can and get out. And for these assessments I'm referring you to, our goal was to get first level visibility. Show them where the major risks are, show them where the major assets are, show them how the technologies are lined up. Our goal was not to like look for every single vulnerability. Our goal was not to like, well, if you locked on this, this, and this, some guy could parachute through the window and swing in and jump over the laser. No, my goal is that cutting machine over there, yeah, it's a robot and it's got a denial of service vuln. Maybe we should patch that. Real quick, high-level vulnerabilities. So we weren't going to go ahead and walk the whole plant floor and look at every single technology. We weren't going to look at every nut and bolt. What we did instead was we made a very simple decision to say, everything that's on the wire that I can get to, that I can look at, that's it. That means probably 20% of the technology I'm not going to look at, I'm okay with that. Probably means that physical risk will probably exist, I'm okay with that. Everything that's on the wire that I can get to, that's what I want to know. Also, everything that's on the wire, or rather also everything that's within physical walking distance. So we're going to walk the plant, and we're going to look at everything that's on the wire, and we're going to look for ways that people could physically compromise the security or digitally compromise it. Yeah?
Are there PETA hackers trying to compromise the systems?
Are there PETA hackers? That is one of the risks, is organizations like PETA wanting to mess with a food plant. So that is on the risk register. The other one is terrorists, right? So wouldn't it be great if I could give the East Coast of the United States salmonella? So... This font? This font is Monaco Bauhaus. Railway. I need to look at Railway. How's Railway look? No, tell me that later. And is Railway free? I paid for that one. Did I get screwed? Oh, I got screwed. He's what he's telling me. All right. So we went through, yes, PETA is one of the risks. Yes, terrorist is another one of the risks. A lot of it is accidental risk. So IT guy on the floor does something, and if the packets are all connected and there's no segmentation, knocks over something, it's actually more of a likely risk. Malicious insider, those types of things. So when we're doing this, we want to try and be as very creative as possible. We created a process that began with coffee beans and ended with coffee. Now, I often say that like my entire career is based on making sure I have enough coffee, and as long as that happens, everything's good. It's all about maintaining that delicate balance of how much risk we can identify versus how much it costs, how much insight we can get versus how fast we're going. It's all about having a very, very, very clean process. So when we go ahead and look at all this operational technology, we can get as much out as possible with as little risk to the environment and what have you. So one way we did that was two things. One, we started pulling configuration files off of this environment. I'll talk about that in a second. Another is we put in network taps at each one of the segments and each one of the egress points. So we started collecting tons and tons of packets. We started collecting tons and tons of configuration files. There is a tool called Digital Bond. I'd suggest you guys go check it out if you haven't already. What Digital Bond will allow you to do is effectively perform a Nessus scan, but using a config file. So instead of actually scanning the real device, you simply ask the operations folks for those config files, and you scan the config files and look at vulns and report it up that way. Significantly lower risk, very, very cool tech. Digital Bond does a lot of research, and most of their stuff is free. The only challenge with Digital Bond is they focus very heavily on the power side. So because of that, only about 3 or 4% of the technology assets we were looking at could we do a Digital Bond scan on. But it gave a lot of insight on those power equipment, as well as we gave a lot of information back to Digital Bond, so they're looking at extending the config files and extending the reach based on what we were looking for. So that's the config file. The other thing is with all those network taps, so we put in the network taps, we start capturing packets. We capture those packets, and then we analyze those packets for vulnerabilities. We use a thing called Nessus Passive Vulnerability Scanner. This is what some of the output looks like. It gives us all our hosts, it gives us our vulnerabilities, everything you'd imagine from a normal vulnerability scanner, but again, without having to actually scan the device. It also does some cool stuff, like say, hey, we've got some Siemens, we got some Modbus. This is kind of weird. We got some Ethernet IP. That's kind of strange. It gives us a whole bunch of information as to what the communication protocols are and what the vulnerabilities of those protocols would be. From that, we can start making some logical guesses and assertions as to what the technology is, because only certain things does Modbus, only certain things would do a Siemens client, et cetera, et cetera. And we map all that back up. The passive vulnerability scanner will attempt to do a network topology document like this. And what we can then do with that topology document is reflect it back to the world's ugliest PowerPoint slide and say, okay, here's what the technology is for evisceration, here's what the technology is for cleaning, et cetera, et cetera. So we can map those risks up. These slides and these numbers are not client data. These slides and these numbers were put together by my Academy team for me and using samuraistfu.org. So if you want to play with those PCAP files, if you want to see what those PCAP files look like, you can go there, and they got a series of them that you can download and take a look at what you would find if you're doing a similar assessment. And they also have a whole bunch of other tools. Like STFU is like Kali for ICS. Very cool stuff. So now we've got packet, now we got config, now we got an idea of what everything is. And then we go to the next step, which is actually walk the floor, right? Something that we don't often do. We actually walk around the floor and check the technology. We think it's this, is it really? Do a spot check, figure out what the vulnerability or the make and model is, and report that back up. Another interesting thing about this I didn't think about, there's all sorts of regulations about shoes and footwear and clothes, and I'm like, I'm a hacker, right? You know, my guys are coming in jeans and t-shirts and flip-flops. No, you can't do that. You have to wear this type of equipment. It's got to be this, and it's got to have this type of plastic guard that we throw away after. I'm like, okay. But again, just keep in mind, ICS and operational technology, lots of little things to dig into when you're going on site. So after we get all that information, we do the thing that my poor Academy team hated, that took the most amount of time, that took them forever to do. We do a paper vulnerability assessment, and what that looks like is, because ICS in OT doesn't have, oftentimes, CVEs attached to their vulnerabilities, because they oftentimes don't have a full vuln database, because they don't have that level of information centrally located. What we do is, with the support contract for each one of these manufacturing, is we pull down all the release notes. So this equipment was installed in 1998, and it hasn't been patched since then. So pull down release notes from 99, 2000, all of them. And then I had my poor Academy guys go through and pull out all the vulnerabilities and put them in a database and share those out. We actually ended up writing several like text parsing scripts, which made this a lot easier. But this is really the meat of the work. And the unfortunate thing is at the moment, because we're building this from vendor-supplied documentation, because the vendor-supplied documentation is under a support contract and his NDA and everything, we can't share this out. One of the first things I want to do is, hey, now I've got all this data. Wouldn't it be great if I could just publish it in the database and share it to all you guys? At the moment, we can't do that legally, which is unfortunate. We're working on that. So now we've got all the information about the devices that we could see, again, on about 80% of them. We walked the floor, we pulled all the release things, and now we need to figure out how we're going to communicate these risks up, which is where it gets to people, which is where people becomes incredibly important. Oftentimes, when you're at a security conference and you're hearing about people, you hear the same thing, right? It begins at the top. One must have appropriate amounts of buy-in at the top to affect change. You're like, And that's true. I'm not debating that. But I think what we oftentimes forget, especially in food manufacturing, but really just about in every environment I go to, is these are like the people who are on the range, right? These are the lone individuals, right? These are the rugged guys who are like, this is my factory. This is my food producer. I'm going to run it my own way. Corporate has their opinions, and I'll listen to them until corporate leaves. So I would urge you guys, whenever you hear all the great things about buy-in from the top, to think about the real influencers, right? Think about the people who are making the changes after the corporate guys leave. I tend to think of these guys like the silverback gorilla, right? The silverback gorilla is the guy in the meeting who doesn't say anything until the end of the meeting, and then everyone looks at him, he's like, yeah, that sounds good, we're going to do this. Everyone writes it down, they go and do it, right? Silverback gorilla in the dev space, you see this a lot. Silverback gorilla is the woman who everyone's in the meeting goes, yeah, what does she think, right? Or silverback gorilla is when you're doing an assessment where everyone's like, you know, you really need to talk to Jane or John, right? They're the ones who know. Silverback gorillas are your huge, huge, huge asset because they're the ones who know where all the skeletons are buried. And usually when I'm talking about silverback gorillas, everyone's like, do you mean grape ape? No, but he is pretty badass. Absolutely, he is an influencer in his own way. But so you want to find that silverback gorilla because they're the ones who are actually going to affect change. Get buy-in at the top, get your messaging aligned with the top, but also make sure you get your messaging aligned with the silverback gorilla. We're very fortunate in one environment where I'm like, here's our results. And we talked to the silverback gorilla, and he's like, you're really going to say that? No, I'm not. I thought the same thing. Someone else must have wrote that. He's like, I was in a meeting and they said that and our operations guy lost it. Like, you do not want it. That's a landmine. There's no reason for you to say that. I think what you really meant to say is this. I'm like, absolutely. That's exactly what I meant to say. So it's those types of things that can help you navigate all those landmines and make sure your results are good. But, of course, even then, even with Silverback Gorilla and the buy-in from the top and all the information, surprise, we're going to get a little pushback. And the number one thing we always hear whenever we present these results is, we always done it this way, though, Wolf. We've been delivering cattle to market for 20 years, and no one has ever attacked us from PETA. Why should I patch my AIX box? Maybe you've just been really lucky. Maybe the fact that if you do patch it, it doesn't hurt. Maybe, you really have to get ahead and have like your entire reason planned and mapped, because that is going to come up every single time. All right, sixth step, once we have the governance figured out, once we have walking around, once we have the process for getting data, once we have the people and how we're going to communicate it up, is simplify the hell out of it. I think oftentimes in security, we're like, hey, we got something, it worked, we won. And then we go home. But it's usually like, hey, we got something, we worked, and we won. And then you do it again, and you make it a little better, and again, and again, and again. By the first couple of these, we thought we were badass. By the 10th, we were kicking some major ass. And by the 15th, we're like, this is a really good process. We should tell someone about this. I know. Because each time we go through it, we got to simplify it and constantly have that feedback loop. Oftentimes, I think we miss that feedback loop. So after every one of these, collect some data. What do we do right? What do we do wrong? How can we make it simpler? And rinse and repeat. All right, before I get into what we found, questions about methodology for assessment? Nope. Okay. So, asset inventory. We expected we would find old stuff. We expected we would find unusual stuff. One of the things I did not expect is that they would not have an asset inventory. I kind of should have from the IT world, right? Does anyone have a good CMDB? Anyone have a good IT asset? No, we never do. So I kind of should have known that. I should have went like, yeah, we're not going to ask you. That was one of the first things. Like, hey, can we have schematics and can we have a good asset inventory? Like, you're funny. You're new here, aren't you? Yeah, I am. But actually, this ended up being a real good output. So something to think about when you're talking to silverback gorillas and you're building momentum is what can we give you guys from our process? And so one of our outputs actually ended up being, hey, we're going to give you a good schematic and a good asset inventory. Fantastic. That walked us into a few plants. Some of the things we found is not many robots. That bummed me out. About 8% of them were Entron, HMS, and Frick. 13% of the equipment we were looking at was from Opto, and a whopping 76% of it was Rockwell and Allen Bradley. That actually makes me very, very happy. Because Allen Bradley, I would argue, is one of the OT vendors, one of the leaders for security. They're doing a lot of work to educate the OT folks as to what it means to do security, how to talk to the IT guys and whatnot. So that actually made me very happy. And one of the locations we were looking at, the Allen Bradley guys actually came out and presented their view of it, which was phenomenal. Also good information we gave back to Digital Bond to say, hey, can we get deeper insights into these products? Next thing is we did expect to find aging technology. Again, these are several millions of dollars worth of equipment. Again, these things run for years and years and years. Here's what it actually broke out at. Only 8% of them were 1 to 5 years, 12% 6 to 10. Most of them reflected a boom of construction around 10 to 15 years ago. Right before the crash, that we built a lot of factories, which is pretty interesting. What this means is Windows 2000 and XP will run forever. At least another 10 years, so we need to take that into account. And then the rest of them were actually 40% were 16 years and older, so much, much older stuff. Again, the AIX is the real, true legacy system with serial connectors and baling wire and twine, which will, again, need to be protected and run forever. The fact that we're doing XP and Windows 2000 for at least another 10 years means we need to be very, very tight at protecting those infrastructures. Obviously, these organizations are not going to move away from them. If they were, they would have moved off this a long time ago. So what does that mean? You know, the normal security guy answer is, oh, we need segmentation. That's the normal answer. It's a great answer. And right away, it was like the wireless conversation all over again. We need segmentation. We do segmentation. No, I mean, like, we need to segment that other equipment from this equipment. Yeah, we totally do that. I mean, so we can't talk to it. No, you mean like a broadcast, right? No, I mean like at the application layer? No, we totally have everything segmented in VLANs, and it's just like Cisco says, and we have got no broadcast traffic that covers it. I'm like, great. Did you read the chapter in ACLs? Because so oftentimes all of these networking guys have been taught segmentation means separate VLANs, so there's no, and then they put in a route statement and they route all the packets back and forth, and you're like, there goes my security. I can get to the 40-year-old piece of equipment from the guest Wi-Fi. That's phenomenal. So number one thing was segmentation. Back to what I was saying about always go to the silverback gorillas with a gift, right? Appease your silverback gorillas, give them bananas. Asset inventory for the operations folks, for the networking folks. Hey, what if I could tell you what was talking to what and give you a list of what your ACLs should be? How the hell can you do that? Because we've got packets. Oh, so when you do all the packet capture, we actually dumped out and gave them recommendations for the ACLs, which made the segmentation significantly easier. Third-party risks. So no one wants to do anything other than the core business. Isn't that like modern business? I do what I do well, so you do what you do well for me, right? That's like business 101. So a lot of these organizations are now bringing in cafeterias. They're bringing in, what was the latest one we saw? Like vending machines. Vending machines that the vending machine contract says, please plug this vending machine into your network so it can get out to the internet. Fantastic. You got that segmented, right? Yeah, no broadcast traffic gets to that. So we did find lots of surprise egress points. We found lots of surprise Wi-Fi hotspots, we found lots of surprise equipment, and usually it was driven by a vendor who came in, had a contract, they plugged stuff in, things happened. So keep that in mind as well. Third-party risks, very, very high. We saw that with Target, right? We mentioned Target, Ian mentioned Target, and one of the ways Target came in, of course, was through third parties. Vulnerabilities. We expect to find things like, hey, clear text, remote code, product manipulation. Here's how it broke out. SQL injection and cross-site scripting, relatively low. I think that doesn't reflect the fact that they're really good at making SQL injection, cross-site scripting proof technology. That more reflects the fact that most newer technologies would have these vulns, and there's not many of them in place. Lots of remote access, 4% unauthenticated. We can get at that with no problem, no password. That's a big, big problem. And then down here to now service plain text passwords. So, yeah. Do we scan it? No, because 1 in 10 of them are subject to denial of service. It says right in the product manual, you will crash if you scan this. So lots of denial of service vulns, and of course lots and lots of plain text passwords. This is very important again, because if you're doing packet capture, guard those packet captures very carefully, because now you got all the passwords to an entire food processing plant. Also fun to dump all those out and give those to the silverback gorilla and say, do you know your passwords are password 123? So, but be very, very careful if you're doing this as to who can get at those PCAPs. So, when we dump all this together and we look at it all, we can begin to shine some light for the internal organization as to where their operational technology risks are. And part of it is integrating the OT with the IT security programs, having that one program together so we can say, hey, what's at risk is you're boiling and washing. What's at risk is you're cutting and processing. What's at risk is your organization's ability to do this process. What is the dollar value if you got a factory down for a week doing that? Hugely, hugely impactful. So reporting risk that way and showing again, similar to a threat model, but showing again the map of how that would happen. Also tying it back to governance. Not a pretty slide. I don't want to read off section 553 through 5557 as segmentation, and this is a concern. But a very impactful one when all your organization is being driven to NIST and needs to report back to standards. So that's what we found, and I'm just going to run right into the end. Food fight is what we've been talking about, right? It is a fight. It is a fight internal to the organization to get security up. It's a fight across all our organizations to address these concerns. And it's a fight we fight every single day. You know, we know that food is a modern marvel. Tons of manufacturing equipment. Everything we found here could be found in most factories. Tons of power equipment. Every risk we found is found through our power plants everywhere. Same thing with water. And yet we don't have in the food industry NERC, SIP, breathing down their back, right? And yet we don't have the same regulations as water because these organizations are not putting water back into the system. So there's a lack of oversight, which means the food industry in terms of technology has even less. We oftentimes joke about checkbox compliance, but at least we can force them to that, right? Because at least they have to do that. We don't have that same ability within food. So we know nothing is more secure or more personal than securing our food, especially when we're about to go eat off a food truck. Right? But one of the things that oftentimes people ask me after this is, well, wait a minute. Does that mean our food's at risk? Should I not go out and eat lunch? I'm like, no, eat lunch. We actually have a really safe food supply because of something called the FDA. And of course, the FDA came out of the jungle. Upton Sinclair wrote this novel. And here's what's going on, and here's how they're processing food, and had all these characters and all this plot that no one ever paid attention to, but everyone freaked out because they found out how food was being made. And to like his dying day, Upton John was very mad about that. It's like, didn't anyone read the book? I'm like, no, it was a good story. Good story, bro. But with all the uproar that came out of the jungle was how we ended up with the FDA. And the FDA has been fantastic at enforcing the food safety side of that, right? So if there is a technology risk, hopefully it gets caught at the business side by the FDA before it goes out. But we have not yet had the jungle for information security. And hopefully, maybe we won't. It'd be great if we don't need to get that point. But we have not yet had those conversations, and that concerns me very much. And of course, it's not just food. It's also the technologies in our data centers, in our manufacturing plants, and our plant floors. The operational technology is all over the place. So that, in a nutshell, is what we're faced with. I'm going to skip that slide. Oh, maybe I won't. It's not at 11 a.m. though. It's at 2. I'm giving a talk specifically about playing doctor, which is how to then take these risks and communicate them to the people who are doing the work. Bam! Mic drop. Yes, it was. So that in a nutshell is what we did. That's in a nutshell what we found. That's what we're looking at operational technology. I hope that's given you guys some insights to where food industry is today and some ideas that you can try back at your organizations if you've got similar operational technology risks. All right, here's my contact information. I'll be around. If you guys have any questions, you can hit me up over lunch. And again, I'll be presenting at 2 o'clock. Thank you so much.